Joseph Stalin, born Iosif Jugashvili, known as the Man of Steel, ruled the Soviet Union with an iron grip from the mid-1920s until his death in 1953. Operating from the Kremlin in Moscow, Stalin transformed the USSR into a global superpower, but at a horrific human cost. His regime orchestrated the forced collectivization of agriculture between 1928 and 1933, which triggered a famine that killed millions, most devastatingly in Ukraine during the Holodomor. Through the Great Purge of 1936 to 1938, Stalin ordered the arrest, torture, and execution of political rivals, military leaders, and ordinary citizens. Estimates suggest over 700,000 were killed. The Gulag system expanded under his watch, enslaving millions in brutal labor camps. Yet he was also hailed as a wartime hero after leading the Soviet Union to victory over Nazi Germany in World War II. Stalin died in 1953 from a stroke, leaving behind a legacy soaked in blood and contradiction. His rule reshaped not just Russia, but the balance of world power, cementing the Cold War's bitter ideological divide and sparking debates over tyranny, sacrifice, and control that endure to this day. Adolf Hitler, known as the Führer of Nazi Germany, ruled from 1933 to 1945. Born in Austria in 1889, he rose to power amid the ruins of World War I, capitalizing on national humiliation, economic collapse, and deep-seated anti-Semitism. By the late 1930s, Hitler had transformed Germany into a totalitarian regime, banning opposition, controlling the media, and militarizing society. Under his leadership, the world descended into World War II in 1939, sparked by the invasion of Poland. But it was what followed that seared his name into history's darkest chapters. Hitler orchestrated the Holocaust, a state-sponsored genocide that led to the systematic murder of over 6 million Jews, along with Roma, the disabled, and other persecuted groups. As Allied forces closed in, he died by suicide in a Berlin bunker on April 30, 1945. His death marked the collapse of the Third Reich. But the scars he left remain deeply etched in memorials, trials, and global memory. His legacy is one of destruction and a chilling reminder of what happens when hate is given absolute power. Mao Zedong, often called Chairman Mao, was the founding father of the People's Republic of China, ruling from 1949 until his death in 1976. Born in 1893 in Hunan Province, Mao rose from peasant origins to lead the Chinese Communist Party through brutal civil war and the devastating Japanese invasion. But after seizing power, his vision turned catastrophic. The Great Leap Forward, from 1958 to 1962, aimed at rapid industrialization, collapsed into chaos, causing famine that killed an estimated 30 to 45 million people. Then came the Cultural Revolution, from 1966 to 1976, a campaign to purge bourgeois elements, where millions were persecuted, tortured, or killed. Teachers, intellectuals, even loyal communists. Entire families vanished. Schools shut down. The Red Guards, youths loyal to Mao, unleashed ideological terror. Yet through it all, Mao retained a godlike status, his portrait looming over Tiananmen Square, his little red book recited like scripture. When he died in 1976, China was shattered socially, economically, and spiritually. Today, Mao remains both revered and reviled. To some, he's a symbol of national pride. To others, the architect of unimaginable suffering. His legacy is etched in blood and revolution, a paradox still shaping modern China. Kim Il-sung, known as the Eternal President of North Korea, ruled from 1948 until his death in 1994. Born in 1912 near Pyongyang, he rose to power after World War II with Soviet backing, establishing a rigid communist regime in the northern half of the Korean peninsula. In 1950, Kim launched a surprise invasion of South Korea, igniting the Korean War, a brutal conflict that claimed over 2.5 million lives and ended in a tense stalemate by 1953. Internally, Kim enforced absolute control through a cult of personality, purging political opponents, imprisoning hundreds of thousands in forced labor camps, and starving millions through disastrous economic policies in the decades that followed. His regime became synonymous with surveillance, repression, and isolation. Yet he crafted a powerful dynastic myth, passing leadership to his son, Kim Jong-il. To this day, Kim Il-sung remains a godlike figure in North Korean propaganda, his statues towering over a nation he molded through fear and fanaticism. His legacy is etched not in prosperity, but in control, a totalitarian blueprint still haunting the Korean peninsula. Leopold II of Belgium, often dubbed the Butcher of the Congo, ruled from 1865 to 1909, but his shadow looms darkest over Central Africa. In 1885, under the guise of humanitarianism, he seized the Congo Free State as his personal colony. What followed was one of history's most brutal exploitations. Rubber was king, and the Congolese paid in blood. Villages were razed, families were mutilated. Failure to meet quotas meant severed limbs, sometimes of children. Estimates suggest that between 10 to 15 million people perished between 1885 and 1908. Eyewitnesses like missionary Alice Seeley Harris and whistleblowers like diplomat Roger Casement exposed the horror to the world. Under immense international pressure, Leopold was forced to cede the territory to the Belgian government in 1908, but by then, the damage was irreversible. Leopold died in 1909, despised by many. Today, statues fall, and debates rage. Was it colonial greed or genocidal cruelty? One thing is certain. His legacy is soaked in suffering, and the Congo still bears its scars. Pol Pot, born as Saloth Sar, was the ruthless architect of Cambodia's darkest era. Known as Brother Number One, he led the Khmer Rouge regime from 1975 to 1979. Under his rule, Cambodia was transformed into a nightmarish agrarian labor camp where money, religion, and education were abolished. His vision of a classless society demanded purification through death. Nearly 2 million people, intellectuals, professionals, monks, and even children, were executed, starved, or worked to death in the infamous killing fields. Victims were blindfolded, taken to mass graves, and slaughtered with farming tools to save bullets. The Tuol Sleng prison alone saw over 14,000 tortured. Only a handful survived. In 1979, after Vietnam invaded and toppled his regime, Pol Pot fled into the jungle, evading justice. He died in 1998, never facing trial. His legacy remains one of the 20th century's most brutal genocides. Saddam Hussein, known as the Butcher of Baghdad, ruled Iraq with an iron fist from 1979 until his capture in 2003. Rising through the ranks of the Ba'ath Party, he seized power in a coup and quickly transformed Iraq into a brutal dictatorship. His regime was marked by mass executions, secret police, and the systematic torture of political opponents. In 1988, he launched a chemical attack on the Kurdish town of Halabja, killing over 5,000 civilians, a crime considered an act of genocide. He waged a devastating war against Iran from 1980 to 1988, leaving more than 1 million dead, and in 1990, he invaded Kuwait, triggering the Gulf War. US-led forces toppled Saddam during the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Captured in December that year, he was tried by an Iraqi tribunal and executed by hanging on December 30, 2006. His fall left Iraq in chaos, opening the door to years of insurgency and sectarian violence. Saddam's legacy is a nation fractured by tyranny, war, and the long shadow of authoritarianism. Benito Mussolini. He rose to power in Italy in 1922, establishing a fascist dictatorship that would shape the nation's fate for over 2 decades. From the streets of Rome to the battlefields of North Africa, Mussolini positioned himself as the strongman Italy needed after World War I. But behind the propaganda was a regime built on repression, violence, and ambition. Mussolini dismantled democratic institutions, crushed political opposition, and relied on the brutal blackshirts to enforce loyalty. In 1935, he invaded Ethiopia in a bloody campaign marked by chemical weapons and civilian massacres. His alliance with Hitler in World War II sealed his fate. Italy became a battlefield, and Mussolini a liability. In 1945, fleeing with his mistress, he was captured by Italian partisans and executed near Lake Como. His corpse, later strung upside down in Milan, became a symbol of fascism's violent collapse. Mussolini left behind a trail of destruction. Francisco Franco, known as El Caudillo, ruled Spain with an iron grip from 1939 to 1975. Rising from the ashes of civil war, Franco emerged as the face of fascist Spain after leading a military coup against the Democratic Second Republic in 1936. Backed by Nazi Germany and fascist Italy, his nationalist forces waged a brutal civil war that killed over 500,000. After victory in 1939, Franco imposed a totalitarian regime, silencing dissent, banning political parties, and executing or imprisoning tens of thousands of opponents during the White Terror. His rule was marked by censorship, secret police, forced labor camps, and the suppression of regional identities like Catalan and Basque. Yet Franco outlasted Hitler and Mussolini, clinging to power for decades while aligning with the West during the Cold War. Upon his death in 1975, Spain began its transition to democracy, but the scars of his dictatorship remain. Slobodan Milošević, known as the Butcher of the Balkans, rose to power in Yugoslavia in the late 1980s, becoming president of Serbia in 1989 and later of the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. At the heart of Europe's bloodiest conflict since World War II, Milošević stoked nationalist fervor, fueling wars in Croatia, Bosnia, and Kosovo throughout the 1990s. Under his rule, ethnic cleansing campaigns led to mass atrocities, most notably the Srebrenica massacre in 1995, where over 8,000 Bosniak men and boys were executed by Bosnian Serb forces. His backing of paramilitary groups and refusal to curb war crimes sparked global outrage. In 2001, after being ousted by popular protests, Milošević was arrested and handed over to the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia in The Hague. Charged with genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes, his trial marked the first time a former head of state was prosecuted for such crimes, but he died in his prison cell in 2006, before a verdict was reached. His legacy is one of deep ethnic scars and shattered republics. Idi Amin, known as the Butcher of Uganda, ruled the East African nation with ruthless force from 1971 to 1979. Rising from a military background in the British colonial army, Amin seized power in a coup, ousting President Milton Obote. At first, he was celebrated by many Ugandans, but within months, the celebrations turned to fear. Amin launched a reign of terror marked by mass killings, ethnic persecution, and economic chaos. His most infamous act came in 1972, when he expelled over 50,000 Asians, mostly Indians, who had long driven Uganda's economy. The result? Economic collapse. Behind closed doors, bodies piled up. Human rights groups estimate that Amin's regime was responsible for the deaths of between 100,000 and 500,000 people. Political opponents, intellectuals, and entire ethnic groups were targeted. Torture chambers in Kampala's Makindye barracks became symbols of state brutality. Even prominent figures like Chief Justice Benedicto Kiwanuka were abducted and murdered. Amin's erratic behavior caught global attention. In 1978, after invading Tanzania, Amin overstepped. Tanzanian forces retaliated, joined by Ugandan exiles, and by April 1979, Kampala fell. Amin fled to Libya, then Saudi Arabia, where he lived in exile until his death in 2003. Idi Amin left behind a legacy of bloodshed, national trauma, and broken institutions. To this day, Uganda continues to reckon with the horrors of his regime. Enver Hoxha, known as the Iron Fist of Albania, ruled the small Balkan nation with absolute power from 1944 until he died in 1985. Rising to prominence during World War II as a communist resistance leader, Hoxha seized control after the Nazi withdrawal and transformed Albania into one of the world's most isolated, repressive states. From Tirana, he cut ties with Yugoslavia in 1948, broke from the Soviet Union in 1961, and denounced China by the late 1970s, leaving Albania utterly alone on the global stage. Under his rule, religion was outlawed, dissent was criminalized, and the feared Sigurimi secret police monitored every whisper. Hoxha's paranoia turned the country into a prison. Over 100,000 Albanians were arrested on political grounds. Thousands were executed or vanished into forced labor camps. In a display of national siege mentality, he ordered the construction of over 170,000 concrete bunkers across the countryside, tiny domes meant to resist an invasion that never came. His purges weren't limited to opponents. Even allies and family members were accused of ideological deviation and eliminated. When he died in 1985, Albania was locked in poverty and fear, years behind the rest of Europe. But his legacy didn't vanish overnight. His cult of personality lingered. Statues crumbled slowly. Only in the early 1990s did Albania transition to democracy. Rafael Leonidas Trujillo, known as El Jefe, ruled the Dominican Republic with an iron fist from 1930 to 1961. Rising from a poor background to become the commander of the army, he seized power through a rigged election and quickly transformed the nation into his personal dictatorship. Trujillo's regime was marked by a blend of extreme nationalism, ruthless repression, and a personality cult that painted him as the father of the nation, even renaming the capital after himself. Under Trujillo, dissent was not just crushed, it was annihilated. Thousands were tortured, disappeared, or executed by his feared secret police. In 1937, he ordered the Parsley Massacre, murdering an estimated 20,000 Haitians near the border in a brutal act of ethnic cleansing. Political opponents were silenced, the media was censored, and power was concentrated entirely in his hands. Even foreign relations were manipulated to serve his image. But his 1959 failed assassination attempt on Venezuelan President Romulo Betancourt finally drew international condemnation. On May 30, 1961, Trujillo's reign ended in a hail of bullets, ambushed and assassinated by conspirators from within his own ranks. The aftermath sent shockwaves across the Caribbean, marking the collapse of one of Latin America's most brutal dictatorships. Yet the transition to democracy was slow and painful. Mengistu Haile Mariam. He was the brutal leader of Ethiopia from 1977 to 1991. Rising from humble military origins, Mengistu seized power following the fall of Emperor Haile Selassie, becoming head of the Marxist-Leninist Derg regime. Under his rule, Ethiopia plunged into one of the darkest periods in its modern history. His reign is remembered for the Red Terror, launched in 1977. Seeking to eliminate political opponents and consolidate power, Mengistu orchestrated mass executions, some carried out personally. Victims were often left in the streets as warnings, with families forced to pay for the bullets used to kill their loved ones. Estimates of the death toll range from 100,000 to 500,000. Meanwhile, his government's mismanagement and use of famine as a weapon during the 1983 to 1985 drought led to catastrophic starvation, killing hundreds of thousands more. By 1991, facing armed rebel coalitions and a collapsing Soviet Union, his chief ally, Mengistu, fled to Zimbabwe. He was later tried in absentia and convicted of genocide in 2006, yet remains under government protection in Harare, untouched by international justice. Mengistu's legacy is one of terror, repression, and betrayal of revolutionary ideals. While he claimed to fight imperialism and class oppression, he left Ethiopia scarred, its people traumatized, and its future derailed by fear and famine. Yahya Khan, Pakistan's third president and chief martial law administrator, rose to power in 1969, inheriting a fractured nation. Known for his authoritarian streak and indulgent lifestyle, Yahya promised a return to civilian rule, but his tenure would end in one of the bloodiest chapters in South Asian history. By 1970, the country was on the brink. In the general elections that year, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman's Awami League swept East Pakistan, securing a clear majority. But Yahya refused to transfer power. The result was catastrophic. On March 25, 1971, Yahya ordered Operation Searchlight, a brutal military crackdown on East Pakistan that led to mass killings, widespread rapes, and the deaths of hundreds of thousands. Entire villages were razed, universities were stormed, intellectuals and students were targeted. The atrocities triggered a full-blown war. By December, India intervened militarily, leading to the Indo-Pakistani War of 1971. The conflict ended with Pakistan's crushing defeat and the birth of Bangladesh on December 16. Yahya Khan's fall was swift. Stripped of power just days later, he was placed under house arrest in 1972 by Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. Though never formally tried, Yahya became a national scapegoat, his name synonymous with defeat and repression. Today, Yahya Khan is remembered not for his military command but for presiding over the disintegration of Pakistan's eastern wing. His legacy is one of failed leadership, brutality, and the high cost of denying democratic will. Nicolae Ceausescu, once dubbed the genius of the Carpathians, ruled Romania with an iron grip from 1965 until his downfall in December 1989. Rising from humble roots in the village of Scornicești, Ceausescu built a cult of personality so powerful, his image was mandatory in every home, every school, every heart, by force. Under his regime, dissent was crushed by the brutal Securitate, one of the most feared secret police forces in Eastern Europe. He launched the disastrous systematization program, bulldozing villages, starving the population, and enforcing one of the most repressive pro-natalist policies in history. Children were packed into orphanages. People froze in their apartments. The economy collapsed while he built a marble palace, the second largest building in the world. By December 1989, the people had had enough. Protests erupted in Timișoara, spreading like wildfire. Ceausescu fled but was captured, tried in a rushed military tribunal, and executed with his wife Elena on Christmas Day, 1989. His death marked the violent end of 24 years of tyranny. Augusto Pinochet, known as the Iron Fist of Chile, seized power in a brutal military coup on September 11, 1973, overthrowing democratically elected President Salvador Allende. For the next 17 years, Pinochet ruled Chile with absolute authority, enforcing martial law and dismantling civil liberties. Under his dictatorship, more than 3,000 people were killed or disappeared, and tens of thousands were tortured by security forces. The regime's notorious intelligence agency, DINA, operated secret detention centers and carried out assassinations even beyond Chilean borders. In 1990, Pinochet stepped down under pressure, yet remained a powerful figure as senator for life. Though arrested in London in 1998 on charges of human rights abuses, he was never tried or convicted, dying in 2006 without facing justice. His legacy remains bitterly divisive. Some credit him with stabilizing Chile's economy, while others see him as a symbol of terror and impunity. Ferdinand Marcos, often called the strongman of the Philippines, ruled from 1965 to 1986. His presidency began with promises of reform, but by 1972, Marcos declared martial law, citing national security. What followed was a dark chapter. Thousands of activists were arrested, tortured, or disappeared. Critics like Senator Benigno Aquino Jr. were silenced. Aquino's assassination in 1983 would become a national flashpoint. Marcos and his wife Imelda amassed a staggering fortune, allegedly over $5 billion, while the country's economy crumbled under debt and corruption. In 1986, a peaceful uprising known as the People Power Revolution forced Marcos into exile in Hawaii. He died 3 years later, unrepentant. His fall marked a victory for democracy, but the scars remain. Today, the Marcos name divides the nation. Some mourn the dictatorship, others call it a golden age. But the truth lies in the silence of the tortured, and in the billions still unrecovered. If you enjoyed these stories, I'm going to be posting a lot more interesting videos here. I'd greatly appreciate it if you could like and subscribe. Thank you very much.